I've worked construction my whole life, and I still can't square this. They raised the Empire State Building in 410 days. No hydraulic excavators, no tower cranes, no welding, dynamite, horses, and hand-driven rivets. 86 stories of steel, plumbed true in the middle of Manhattan, at a pace most modern crews couldn't touch. And it all started 30 feet below the street, with a problem almost nobody talks about. You want to know what it means to start a building like this? You start by digging a hole, big enough for a city block, and deep enough to swallow 4 stories of brick and steel. On March 17th, 1930, they put the first shovels in the ground, right where the Waldorf Astoria had stood. No excavators, no backhoes, just dynamite, picks, and sweat. The footage doesn't lie. You see the blast crews setting charges, drilling 12-inch holes by hand, packing them with sticks of powder, then stepping back while the foreman lights the fuse. The concussion rattles your teeth even through the old film. Rubble flies. Then the muckers move in, boots crunching over broken rock, swinging shovels, loading the debris into steel carts hitched to teams of horses. It's a rhythm you don't see anymore. Men and animals working side by side, every load of spoil dragged out through the mud and noise, up ramps built from scrap timber. Manhattan schist is not forgiving, hard as iron, full of seams. The goal was bedrock, about 30 feet down. They had to clear the entire footprint, 2¼ acres, with nothing but muscle and explosives. I have counted the cycles in the old footage. Blast, shovel, cart, dump, repeat. Crews worked in shifts, day and night, because the schedule did not care about fatigue. If you did not keep up, there was always someone waiting for a spot on the crew. By mid-April, the pit was open and clean, the air thick with dust and the smell of spent powder. You can see the last of the fill going out, the surface leveled off, ready for the formwork and the first runs of rebar. Every scoop, every cartload, moved by hand or hoof. That's how you start a skyscraper without a single hydraulic hose in sight. And that's the kind of labor you remember, even decades later, when you walk past that corner of 5th and 34th. Once you hit bedrock, you're only halfway to a skyscraper. The next move is footings, massive spread pads of concrete, thick enough to swallow a truck, set right onto that Manhattan schist. I've studied the old records and watched the footage frame by frame. You see rebar cages being lowered, wooden forms built tight. Then the first concrete pours running day and night. These weren't just any pads. Some ran 20 feet by 30, 8 feet deep, poured in a single go. That's a mountain of mud and stone, but it had to be dead flat. No room for error when you're stacking steel 1,000 feet high. Here's where Balcom, the engineer, left his mark. Before the concrete set, the crews laid out a grid of anchor bolts, long steel rods, set with a staggered pattern, each one checked and rechecked for plumb and true. I've seen the shop drawings, 1/2-inch and 3/4-inch bolts, buried 12 inches into the pad, with a tolerance that would make a machinist sweat. You miss by 1/8, you're fighting every column all the way up. The bolts locked into a steel grillage, a lattice of heavy billets that spread the load and kept the columns from shifting or twisting under the weight. Once the grillage was set, they poured the rest of the pad around it, making a single solid pier from steel to stone. Modern jobs use piles and mats, drilled deep with GPS and poured with high-performance mixes. Back then, it was all about getting those bolts dead on, by hand and eye, so the steel could drop right in. Every footing was a promise. Get this right, and the rest of the job runs smooth. Miss it, and you'll spend the next year chasing crooked steel. That's the kind of detail only a builder notices. The base rules the tower every time. Steel for a project of this scale began its journey in the Carnegie shops, where every I-beam was measured, marked, and drilled by hand. Gang drills lined up along the webs, each hole punched with a tolerance of plus or minus 30,000ths of an inch. There was no automation, just skilled layout men with chalk, steel rules, and a foreman checking every batch before shipment. A single misplaced hole could throw off the entire sequence, slowing the crew and stalling the build. Timing was everything. Steel left Pittsburgh by rail in carefully numbered bundles. Each load matched to the precise order of erection. The first columns arrived in Manhattan on September 19, 1930, right when the footings were ready. There was no space for extra steel or mistakes. Every piece had to fit. Every delivery had to land on schedule. That is how the rigging crews kept moving, beams swinging into place as soon as the derricks were ready. Shop precision set the pace for the entire job. Steelwork. On a job like this is a kind of ballet. Only the stage is a grid of beams 100 feet in the air and the dancers wear leather gloves. The derricks ran the show. Big lattice booms perched on timber cribbing, those stacks of rough-cut lumber built up like giant Jenga blocks. You had to trust the cribbing. If it shifted, the whole crane could tilt, and then you would have a real problem. Sterrett's foreman kept a tight grip on every lift. Beams swung in on chokers, steadied by taglines, just ropes, but in the right hands, they kept 1,000 pounds of steel from spinning out or catching the wind. I have watched the footage. A rigger rides the hook, boots dangling, guiding a column into the waiting arms of the connectors. No radios, no hard hats, just hand signals and nerve. Once the steel hit the mark, the real noise started. 4-man rivet gangs worked each joint. One man ran the furnace, glowing red in the dawn. Another tongs the rivet, tosses it, sometimes 30 feet through open air, to the catcher. The catcher jams it into the hole, and the bucker holds a heavy bar against the back, while the gunner drives the head flat with a pneumatic hammer. Every shot echoes off the frame. You get a rhythm, heat, throw, catch, drive, move on. The crews could set thousands in a shift, working floor by floor as fast as the derricks could feed them steel. 4.5 stories a week, up and up, with nothing but muscle, air, and fire. You want to know what separates a good steel job from a legendary one? It's not just the speed or the muscle. It's the way you keep everything true, floor after floor. That's where the alignment crew comes in, and where you start seeing turnbuckles and plumb bobs hanging from every other column. You watch the old footage and there's a guy with a level, another with a tape, and a signal man squinting up the frame, calling out fractions of an inch. Turnbuckles, those chunky threaded couplers, are the secret sauce. They let you tweak a column just enough to get it dead plumb, even after 1,000 bolts are set. One man on a spud wrench, another on the tag line, and the whole line of steel shifts a hair, locking the frame square before the next bundle swings in. Every few floors, the foreman drops a plumb bob from the top deck and checks the run. If you are off, you fix it now, not later. That is how you stack 4.5 stories a week without chasing mistakes up the building. People talk about the 410-day schedule like it's a miracle, but it is really 1,000 small adjustments, every shift, every joint. By the time the last beam is set, the frame is so straight you could drop a marble from the 80th floor and hit the base plate. Once the steel is locked in, the masons and glaziers are waiting. The frame is ready for its skin, and the next race is about to start. Once the steel was climbing, the masons and glaziers were right behind, turning bare frame into a building you could actually use. Bricklayers worked off swinging scaffolds, setting up shelf angles, those chunky steel ledges bolted right to the frame to hold the masonry veneer. Every floor they would lay up the brick from the bottom shelf angle to the next, keeping their lines true by eye and by string, always checking for plumb. Mortar was mixed in tubs and hauled up by hoist, slung in buckets or wheelbarrows. No pumps, no ready mix trucks, just muscle and timing. The glaziers followed close, setting steel sash windows into the frames as soon as the openings were ready. Back then, glazing was a dry fit, with glass set into steel with putty or a thin strip of lead, not the fancy sealants you see now. The trick was to keep the lower floors weather tight so interior crews could start their work even as the top floors were still open to the sky. Brick and glass kept pace with the iron, one floor after another, sealing the building as it rose. 80% of building the Empire State was pure logistics, moving materials, keeping hoists running, and making sure every trade could work without delay. Temporary lifts clung to the frame, 73 in all, hauling everything from marble to buckets of mortar, day and night. Electricians, masons, plumbers, and glaziers worked side by side, often with nothing but open air above them, relying on strict hoist schedules and the sharp eyes of signalmen. Even with all that order, 5 men lost their lives. For a project that size, at that speed, the number lingers. Pride and risk hung together in every frame of old footage. You stand in front of that building today, and every inch still holds the mark of hands, of ironworkers, of laborers, and of immigrants who made the impossible routine. In an age of digital models and prefab modules, nothing replaces boots on steel. The lesson is simple. Skill and grit still set the skyline. Thanks for watching.